Need to sit down, take a chew and chew my money till we get it. Paul Wall, let it cool, was ain't talking.
Checkity check. Mr. Barack, are your balls all the way empty yet? He says, his schlong halfway down his throat in Gary, Indiana. Barack says, I'm gonna come on your face. He just fucking I'm not like a power hungry guy, but in peak power, if Barack Hussein Obama asked me to hog him down, I'd schlob his hog in a minute. But the guy that's claiming that he schlobbed Obama's hog, he said he did that like in like 2005. Then Obama was just a dude. That's just gay sex, man. I would never just have gay sex, but if a powerful person told me, if you slob on my knob, I'll give you power, that's more tempting. But like just smoking crack and blowing a dude, that's just gay activity. You'll never catch me doing that. Welcome to the Fart Locker. I was homeschooled by Christian fundamentalists, I tell people I was homeschooled, and there's like a lot of people that were homeschooled in a way to where it's like they were homeschooled to make their education better. You know what I mean? But my mom still jokes, like, I don't know math, so my kids kind of went without it. Because, like, I still haven't needed to use math, but maybe that's just because I never knew it in the first place. But, like, I grew up in a type of homeschool that, like, they were super scared that we would even learn about evolution. Like, learning about evolution in a way is where, if we understood evolution, we'd be tempted in, like, the worldly temptations. Like, we'd want some sort of, like, hedonistic approach to life if we thought we came from monkeys. And coming from monkeys somehow dehuman or devalues our lives as humans. And even today, recently I found out, we don't even come from monkeys. We have a common ancestor with monkeys. I never knew that until I was an adult, and I was telling my wife, I was like, yeah, dude, because, like, I didn't believe we came from monkeys growing up, but now I do. And she's like, wait, we didn't come from monkeys. And I was like, okay, I'll change my mind again. Like, I'm not like, addicted to believing in evolution or something. Like, I don't really care, but we have a common ancestor. Like, one ancestor was, like, a little bit like a monkey, a little bit like a people, and then their descendant, now I'm just politely explaining evolution. She went to public school, so she just learned this. I had no idea. And, like, for my parents, it's a scary world, right? That's a true matter of fact. It's a scary world, and a lot of dangerous and bad things happen. And everyone's looking for answers on how to avoid their kids living in a scary world, or at least minimizing the consequences of how scary the world can be for everybody. So, like, I don't fault my parents for being like, we're going to be Christian fundamentalists and homeschool them and, be, 2 swings away from Amish the entire time. It's a crazy attempt to, like, soften the blows of the heavy hand of the world, but that's what it is. They just wanted to live a good life and have their kids live a good life. They came from, abject poverty across the deep South in Arkansas and Mississippi. But for them, the risk of me not understanding math was so worth my placement in heaven, right? What's crazy is people that homeschool now, their thing is like, I'm so scared my kid will get shot in a school shooting. Not a concern for my parents, because they're like, that's just a free ticket to heaven. Oh, you're scared of being a martyr for Christ? Well, let's start there. let's start right there. Yeah, well, they also like were really into the books like She Said Yes, like the books about Columbine that framed Columbine in this way to where it was like an attack on Christianity and like an attack on true believers, which like to this day, everything bad that happens is an attack on me by my enemies. So I totally understand that. I'll never not relate with thinking the world's against you because, homeschooled in a little bubble where the world's so evil and scary that like even learning about evolution or math could derail my life so badly that we have to like really focus on getting that stuff right. But it wasn't just my parents. Like my parents weren't like isolated silos in this world living in fear. They had a community of other people that they got to raise their kids with. So it's like when people talk about like high control groups like churches or cults that have like really high demand of their members, they often forget that like those high control groups have like really high value reward for being a part of it. And like a community that will help you move at the drop of a hat, a community that will help you homeschool your kids, a community that would come through and help you pay rent if you needed to. Like that comes along with being like a weirdo fundamentalist. And also so the other things that are like consequences of that ideology, like spanking babies. Wild, right? But it says in the Bible, spare the rod and spoil the child. So if your baby's crying, people like Gary Ezzo, who wrote Homeschool Curriculum, would be like, dude, they need to be spanked. Or don't feed them. Like just crazy consequences like that don't come from a bad place, but it pretty quickly starts to be in a dark, weird place. If you're living in a world that's so scary you're not feeding your kid or you're spanking your baby, you've taken a few missteps there, right? And that's like most of the people homeschooling their kids. They're not fucking evil. They're just weird and they have a bad understanding of the way the world works and they're trying to minimize harm, right? So like because of that, there are all these weird consequences that we weren't allowed to do, things that we called like worldly. One of them was Pokemon. Pokemon was a big one. And I remember when Pokemon first became popular and like all the moms in the church were like, dude, do not let your kids play Pokemon. The moms met up in their long denim ankle-length dresses to talk about how Pokemon is bad. And the big takeaway they had, they were like, Pokemon comes from Japan. And Pokemon is actually Japanese for pocket monsters. You're putting a monster in your pocket, and then after a while, after you cherish this monster and make it an idol, it will evolve into a stronger monster. And like homeschool moms hearing that were like, oh, dude, one-way ticket to hell. Evolution, a monster you love, you're keeping it in your pocket. Do you know what should be in your pocket? One of those tiny New Testament Bibles that also has Psalms and Proverbs. Like, that's what should be in your pocket. So, like, Pokemon was a no-go. And because of stuff like that, we had Christian versions of stuff like Pokemon and Magic cards. One popular one was called God cards. But the only kids in my weird homeschool community was the weird outcast kids in that community, which we later learned were just kids with autism. We had no idea what autism was. We were just like, hey, some of the kids that we're homeschooled with have that weird thing where they're just fucking off. They're just off. And the kids with autism that we didn't know were autistic, they were playing God cards. And they'd meet in between church services on Sunday in the youth room to like toss God cards. And then after a while, that became I remember my friends Noah and Luke Batty went to this Christian karate. Yeah, Christian karate. Because normal karate can't just punch and kick for fun, dude. If you're not punching and kicking a spiritual battle, dude, you might be punching and kicking on the wrong side of history. So they went to this Christian karate, and they were a part of the God Cards team. They're a little autistic. They're my boys. If you can't tell, I'm a little something. But they were, I was in that crew. They said that they went to a idol bonfire where they burned magic cards and God cards and things like that, things that took them away from their spiritual walk towards connecting with the creator. If your creator can't get in between you and Digimon cards, you're worshiping the wrong god. Like, your god isn't strong enough to beat Pokemon. That's nuts, dude. What a flaccid, weak power you worship. That's insane. That's insane to me. But stuff like Pokemon, Pocket Monsters, Scooby-Doo, stuff like that, that was a no-go. I remember the first time I saw a Scooby-Doo cartoon, and I found out that the ghosts in the Scooby-Doo are always just dudes. I couldn't wait to tell my mom. I was like, Mom, it's not about demons. Like, it turns out that the demons are just dudes this entire time. And that lesson, me learning that later in life, was probably pretty intentional there. Can tell you that much. But stuff like that I've always had like this disconnect on, because I'm 32 years old and I still feel the consequences of being homeschooled. Not just like in the cultural sense where I'm like, no, I've never seen the cartoon Doug. Like, I don't know what the cartoon Doug's about. And I'm a grown man now. So I'm not going to be like, hey, let's go watch cartoons from the 90s that my parents wouldn't let me watch. Like, I'm too busy fucking trying to pay rent. You know what I mean? Like, I don't have time to go and relive the nostalgia of the worldly kids that had all these options. Because for me, it was like Bible Man, Veggie Tales. Bible Man was a big one. Bible Man had powers that came straight from the Bible. In the Christian world, it's like all they want, dude. If you have like the armor of God, the sword of God, the chest plate of righteousness, the shoes of truth, stuff like that. Or I think shoes of truth I might have just made up. A little ironic. I might have just lied about that one. The chest plate of righteousness for real though. I know that one's there 100%. But because of all these like things that people that I consider normal, like people that I know that are also like in their 30s grew up with that I didn't get to do or didn't want to do after I was allowed to do stuff like that, it just always seemed lame to me. You know what I mean? So, like, when Pokemon Go first came out and people were like, dude, I got Pokemon on my phone. I was like, that's crazy. I'm 25 years old. I do heroin and crack. Like, I don't think Pokemon Go's on the timeline for me right now, dude. Like, for me, it's about working a shift at the restaurant I work at and then trying to score some fucking drugs, dude. Like, it's unbelievable. That was like, that's for kids. That's nuts. That's pocket monsters, dude. You're putting that in your pocket. But when Pokemon Go first came out, it completely swept the nation, the world, I imagine, right? Where everyone was playing Pokemon Go nonstop. And then if there was a part on the map that had like a Pokemon you wanted, people would gather. I worked at a vegetarian restaurant that had some sort of like nest behind it. I worked at Bolden Creek Cafe, and grown adults with blue hair and autism would come and be like, dude, I just played Pokemon Go in y'all's Pokemon, and I got some fucking Pokemon you haven't heard of. I'm like, dude, I have no idea what that is. That's insane. you're a big giant baby. Like, you are obsessed with things that babies like to do because no one ever told you it was bad. All I ever heard was that's bad. All my entire life, that stuff that's for babies, I was like, that's the type of thing babies like that send you straight to hell. So I never picked up Pokemon Go one time, never downloaded it on my phone. I knew so many people that played it nonstop all the time. Recently, Pokemon Go sold their data to an investment group that's owned by a Saudi royal family. It's actually owned by the nation's investment group. With that data, they are able to 3D map all of the United States. I'm not just talking about like our roads and the stuff you see on Google Maps. I'm talking about like our bedrooms. I'm talking about like the back room of the kitchen at Bolden Creek Cafe where those people were behind there catching Charmanders while I was doing bumps and whippets in the walk-in. Me doing bumps and whippets in the walk-in is a part of the data map that Saudi Arabia has for Austin, Texas. I don't know too much about Saudi Arabia, but if one of the things that people know about your country is that women can't drive, I'm guessing they're not the good guys in the story, okay? I'm not saying Saudi Arabia. We actually have over 3 listeners in Saudi Arabia. I don't know if you know that. Hope you're not driving around, young ladies. But if you're driving around listening to this, don't put it in the court records, buddy. I don't want to go to war with Saudi Arabia. I love you. I want to pledge my allegiance to the Prince of Saudi Arabia real quick. And the king and their God, 100%, dude. Saudi Arabia, you and me against Israel. We're doing it, dude. Give me one of those swords. Did you see Trump show up to Saudi Arabia and they had like hundreds of dudes dancing with those swords? That's my dream job. My dream job is to be like, yeah, dude, I'm a 3rd generation of this. Dude, I'm a 3rd generation of the sword guy looking around. Oh, that seems like the coolest job in the world. I imagine they have to do something else when dignitaries aren't coming to town. They can't they're just on the streets. They're just busking. They have open mic nights for guys with swords. Because even the sword dancing, I don't know if you watched it, not super choreographed. They really let them rip. They tell those dudes, go out, wave your sword, but be yourself. Like, absolutely. Be yourself out there. Have fun. Wave those swords. You own like 70% of the oil reserves in the world. You, and all of the data for all of America, including the photos of me doing whippets in the walk-in. You own that because stuff like Pokemon Go, it doesn't just give you your location. You know what I mean? Our phones are so complex that like you can do like what's it called? Like what bats do, sonar imaging. You can do sonar imaging with stuff like that. When you have that many phones all connected together, the type of data you have with their Bluetooth bouncing off of each other, the way that the Pokemon Go has access to every photo you've ever taken, stuff like that, like that's insane. The fact that they can see through your camera even without alerting you, Pokemon Go and the Saudi kings and queens are just watching you fucking do your thing. They're looking at me look at sets in between mics nights. That's nuts. They own all of that. So when Japan made the pocket monsters, they gave the monsters access to our pockets by selling that data to Saudi Arabia. Because Saudi Arabia is not just going to keep that on their own. They got a bunch of wild friends that they're going to spread that around to. You know what I mean? They got a bunch of buddies that they say, hey, you want to know what's going on in Winona, Minnesota? Because we have every single building and person mapped out on a 3D model because some nerd in Japan pretended evolution was real so that he could get Pikachu to come and lie to Americans. The Trojan horse of American technology is Pikachu, and inside it are a bunch of Saudi men with swords dancing and laughing at us and selling oil back to us while the Bush family profits somehow. Wild if you're in Texas making money off of Saudi oil. That's so crazy to me. But I didn't really learn about like history or geopolitics in like school. Like, by the time I was like 19, I had no idea what was going on in the world that wasn't like directly in front of me or somehow not, related to a place where Christians are being martyred or victims somehow. So when I was trying to like catch up on what's going on in the world, I tried to do like, not just like, it started with Ancient Aliens. Turns out none of that's real. Ancient Aliens, that guy, I remember the first time I watched an Ancient Alien video, I was like, man, maybe this guy's got some truth. And then I watched like a full episode and I was like, oh, this guy's dumber than me. If you seem dumber than I am, big red flag. Big fucking red flag. That dude is, in a sense, a lot like me. He just likes to talk about stuff he doesn't really know about. Me too. I can't hate him for that. I can't hate the Ancient Alien guys for that. But then I remember going to like half-price books and asking people like, what's good like history books? Like, and they were like, what have you read? And I was like, the Franklin Scandal. I've read the Lincoln conspiracy and the Franklin scandal. I'm like, that's not a good sense of history. So I got that fucking Howard Zinn ass book and read shit like that. And, you know, I started to think people like Saudi Arabia, they're not our enemies. They're just wanting to be a world power just like us. They're dudes over there, squirrels trying to get their nut for winter, saying, hey, let's stack up a little bit of money. Let's get our friends on one side and our enemies on another. And I get, you know, their friends and enemies probably look a whole lot different than my friends and enemies look, but doesn't make it, you know, necessarily any better or worse. But when I learned about ancient history and I was trying to watch YouTubes on ancient history, I was like, oh, this is what I know the most about. And it's because it was what my parents were the most into, was like ancient Egypt. And one thing my mom talked a lot about with ancient Egypt was that they didn't have true progress until the Coptic Christians. My mom thinks that ancient Egypt was just fucking dog shit and mildew until the time of Christ, and then the Coptic Christians really turned it around, built society and stuff like that. And one example that she uses is like, it's not science if you didn't use the scientific method, right? So like ancient Egyptians would do this thing where they would take bread and let it mold, and then take pieces of that mold and then put it on cuts. And it had like a proto version of penicillin, essentially, like a thing to fight bad bacteria from the mildew. But the way that the Egyptians understood it is they were making an offering, and that offering was coming back to them. And so like one thing I hella remember from being homeschooled, from being like a little boy, is like my mom talking about the ancient Egyptians using mold, and the way that definitely saved lives and saved ligaments and made plenty of injuries way better. But they didn't understand the process behind it. But they thought it was like magic, in a sense. They thought it was magic or religion. And the way that worked made that piece of magic functionally true. In the same way that I have no idea how a light bulb turns on, because I didn't do no type of science class, but I see it flip on, and I'm given this language and framework of, oh, science and electricity and engineering is the reason it turns on, and I go, oh yeah, that thing beyond me that I can't really understand, that's the mechanism behind the lights in my room turning on. The Egyptians understood mold from the same exact, from like the same type of framework, where they're like, oh, it's, the mechanism is magic, the mechanism is spirituality, the mechanism is religion, but the functional truth of antibacteria is still true to this day. Like, that's the connecting thread between ancient Egyptians medicine and Western medicine, is the thing that works, like the antibacterial aspect of it. So when I think about stuff like, Pokemon being demons from Japan that came over to hurt my parents' kids, it's like my parents thought that Pokemon was going to give us evolution and make us sinful and gay, and going to make us want to desire worldly things, and that's how it was going to hurt their children. So keeping us away from Pokemon was a positive, good thing, But in reality, as I got older, the reason I'm happy I never played Pokemon is because I'm glad that I never helped map out the world for some Saudi prince. I'm super happy that the powers that be, that are Saudi princes and royalties of other places, that are taking a 3D model of the entire world and doing God knows what with it, I had nothing to do with that business. So the functional truth there is my parents were right. Pokemon was evil. And the functional truth there is like, don't play Pokemon. Don't play Pokemon Go. You're letting demons in your life, and demons are getting in your life to hurt you. But it's not going to teach us evolution or make us gay. It's just going to make war a whole lot easier for people who would want to hurt guys like me. I don't think Saudi Arabia is sitting here going, man, I really want to get that fucking one homeschool Christian who didn't play Pokemon Go. I don't think they're sitting here being like, man, I hope all those communities of people that drink milk that wasn't cooked all the way, like raw milk, and are really into that, are our number one enemy. But the fact that I didn't feed into their weird little machine, I'm like, dude, my parents were right. Not for the right reasons, but I'm super glad they won, And it's just a series of framework. It's a series of understandings and language. In the same way that, the mechanisms behind a light turning on, the mechanisms behind the mold working, we can call them whatever we want. We can understand it or not understand it. It's just a good thing, It's just a good, true thing. Stuff like Pokemon, it was bad. And now I'm wondering about Scooby-Doo. When I think about stuff like that and I go, oh, hey, turns out Pokemon was putting demons in our life. Was Scooby-Doo bad too? I haven't seen it. I wouldn't know. But it'd be crazy if we found out, like, Scooby-Doo was like sold to ISIS to try to groom kids into being wives or something. And when that day comes, I'll stand on my fucking threshold of righteousness saying I was right again, my parents were right again. But, it's a scary world. They, decided to hide from it in a way that made you think that there was a demon around every corner. And now I think I'm not going to hide from the world, but I think, man, there's a fucking Saudi prince around every single corner. I see stuff like 9/11 and I go, dude, that Saudi prince did it. So I guess I believe the same stuff I did when I was younger. I've just given different names and beliefs behind it. I see different mechanisms being the external force that pushes the world towards darkness and pushes the world towards evil. And I have the same exact fears of my parents. And I go, I really hope I'm not a weird homeschool dad. I really hope when I have kids, I'm like, hey, it's okay to play Pokemon. Don't get so mentally ill about it that you're worried a Saudi prince is just watching through your phone saying, hey, look, he can't catch that Pikachu for shit. But it's a scary thing to think about. And it's not just Pokemon Goes. I used Facebook Marketplace the other day, and I was like, I gotta delete this app off my phone. It's gonna try to sell me things I don't need. It's gonna send me emails telling me to make me a trans woman. Like, it's gonna do something to my brain. I guarantee it. And I don't have those weird core beliefs that I had when I was younger, but I have those same fears because that's what was taught. And I think, people that grew up weird like me, people that grew up, sheltered from the world, like half of us just stay in that life forever. Just never even think twice about it. They never downloaded Pokemon Go. They were never tempted to do cocaine with the boys. They just lived their life the way that they wanted to live their life. And then there's people that, go out like on this like Rumspringa style lifestyle thing where they go, oh, dude, I'm going to go play Pokemon Go. I'm going to watch secular movies. I'm going to listen to music with cuss words. And then they have this like come to Jesus moment where they go, oh my God, I have to go back to my fundamental lifestyle and homeschool my kids. And I'm definitely neither of those, right? Like I'm not someone who's like, want to go party until I die and chase hedonism. And I'm definitely not someone that wants to be, a weirdo fundamentalist Christian or have homeschooled kids or have my kids scared to watch Scooby-Doo, but I definitely see my parents saying, dude, don't play Pokemon as like a, you know what, Joe and Diane, hats off to you. You kept me from the grips of Pokemon and evolution. Still don't understand evolution. My wife gets evolution. What was super funny is my mom came to visit me and my wife, and it was so funny because if you grew up believing in evolution, right? I didn't grow up in any type of evolution, no type of nothing. So when my wife says something about blah, 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 well, that's just how we evolved, my mom gets this opportunity to explain to her, well, I believe in microevolution, but not macroevolution. And my wife's the sweetest in the world, so she's not going to be like, hey, I actually went to school. Like, I know how science works. Like, shut the fuck up. That's not a real thing. She was like, oh, well, tell me about that then. Oh, that sounds so interesting. This, like, made-up thing you're riffing right now. Tell me the difference between microevolution and macroevolution. And my mom parroted this refrain that I learned my entire life. And the example that Christians use is actually from Darwin's Origin of the Species, where there are these birds called finches. And they're on this island. I think they're on the Galapagos Islands. But they're on the Galapagos Islands. And all these birds are in different parts of the island. And you could probably just learn this in evolution class. You probably just learn this in the evolution section of math or whatever. I learned this from Christian propaganda. The finches, their beaks are changing based on their patterns of eating. If some finches are eating off rocks, they have harder, different shaped beaks. And if some finches are eating off of flowers and stuff like that, they have longer, different shaped beaks there, right? So their conditions shaped a way that their beaks are. That's evolution, okay? My mom explains that. My wife, who's in her mind like, yeah, I know what Darwin was talking about with the finches. And then she goes, that's microevolution. That's evolution on a really small scale. When evolution happens on a large scale, it's called macroevolution. That's when animals evolve species to a different species. That has never happened. That's the difference between micro and macro. And that's like a good enough answer for someone in a fundamentalist community that's never learned about evolution, that's never learned about the history of the world or science or why we stand on other science shoulders and how they can say the world's so-and-so old or whatever. Still don't know how old the world is. I'll believe anything, though. That's a good enough answer. They go, oh, the micro and the macro. But then I remember being at like a weird Christian conference, And learning that for one of the first times, it was like a one thing conference, something like that, where Christian conferences where like, they keep you up for 48 hours straight, and you do like a bunch of energy drinks, and you do really emotional worship and stuff like that. And then they get these ideas in your head, and they get these ideas about how bad evolution is in your head. And I remember asking a youth leader, I said, so the reason we know macroevolution's fake is because we've never seen an animal evolve from one species to another. And he said, yes. And I said, but didn't man invent species? Like, didn't we name all the different species and decide where one species begins and one species end? And he said, no, God did. He did it in the Bible. They're called kinds. When Noah called all the animals to the ark, he called 2 of each kind. That's all the species that you see on Earth. And I remember being like 12 or 13, willing to die for Jesus Christ, willing to go to war and face royal, brutal jihad for the Lord Jesus Christ, and thinking, I don't think that's right, man. I just don't think that's right. Because even then I knew that the book of Genesis was written like 8,000 years ago, and I just don't think they were talking about the same thing that we're talking about when we say species. I just think that's wrong. But I guess the whole point that I'm trying to make when I'm talking about Pokemon and evolution and the Saudi princes and the fear my parents had and the mold of the Egyptians is like the functional truth remains the same for all of it. And at the end of the day, I think the ancient Egyptians, my weird homeschool community, me now, we've all wanted the same things. We want safety, we want community, we want health, we want security, you know what I mean? But we're given all these different names for things and words for things. And it's even like when you talk to someone who's like a hardcore Democrat or a hardcore Republican, and you talk to them, it's like, do you guys want the same exact goal, which you believe is different ways to get there and what differently it looks like. But we have all these different like frameworks that we've decided on and all these different like religions that we've decided on, when it's like, man, if we could just get the government to legalize weed, we'd all get it. You know what I mean?
With the largest truck nut selection in Texas, the Truck Nut State, and on the internet.
Look at those nuts.
Don't be a wimp and show them your nuts this summer.
I love a man with truck nuts.
All double axle nuts are 20% off for a limited time.
Truck nuts.
Only at Big Bob's Truck Nut Emporium.
Big Bob's.